For this coming Christmas season, let's learn how to make Santa's hat. So, in this video, we create a hat of Santa Claus using the blender. This is the final render output of the hat we create here. Okay, let's start creating. So, first, clear the blender viewport and set the viewport to the top view. And then, add a curve path and rotate it 90 degrees. After that, now add another curve path and set it aside like this. Now let's create the hat using these curve paths. So, select the curve path we added first here and go to its object data. Here, open the geometry drop-down and enter 1 for the depth value here. After that, now select the second path we added for the taper object of this first path. Now we can change the depth of this first curve by editing this second path and moving it along the y-axis. And by changing these path verts one by one, we can gradually change the depth of this from bottom to top. You know that Santa's hat is usually about the shape of a cone. Okay, now let's set this shape using this path. And you may be wondering why we make this shaped object using a path. And this can be made more easily using the blender cone shape. After creating this, I will show you why we do not use blender cone shape for this. We now need to set this to a cone shape. We can do this by moving these verts one by one. And this is the hardest way to do this. But we can use proportional editing to make this easier. So, enable this editing mode by pressing the O key or clicking this button at the top header. Now, select the first vert here and try to move it along the y-axis. You can set the area to be affected by this proportional editing by scrolling the mouse. This circle here shows the proportional editing area. Now scroll up and move this vert 0.8 along the y-axis. You can see now that the radius here is set according to the extent to which this path moves along the y-axis. To tell you more clearly, it sets a horizontal shape similar to the vertical shape of this curve. Okay, now go back to the normal view and rotate this object 90 degrees and move this 2 meters along the z-axis. After moving this, turn to the front view. Now select this object and switch to edit mode. Here, you see that this object looks like a mesh outside, but it's still a curve path in edit mode. So, we can easily edit the shape of this object as we want using this curve path option. Now you can understand, if we used a blender cone shape for this, it would be difficult to edit it. Okay, now let's adjust this hat so that it is folded to one side like this. You can use the proportional editing we used earlier to make this easier. So, first, drag the vert at the top and set it to the bottom left as shown here. And then select the third vert here and move it down as shown here. This is the basic shape of this hat we created now. Now subdivide this curve to give more details for this object. After subdividing, you can now set the mesh details by adjusting these verts one by one. So, now adjust these verts and try to make some extra details for the hat as shown here. This is the final shape of this mesh. After setting the shape here, let us now set the bevel resolution of this shape. Using the wireframe view, you can see what's exactly this shape looks like. You can see that the faces of this mesh are not subdivided correctly. So, enter 32 for the bevel resolution value here. Okay, now the problem here is fixed. We have now finished creating the shape of the fabric part of Santa's hat. Let us now create these wool-haired parts of this hat. There are 2 parts of this hat that are wool-haired. Here, we can use a sphere mesh for this one and for the other, we have to use a ring-shaped object. Okay, let's start with this haired sphere. To do this, set the 3D cursor to the end corner of the hat and add a UV sphere. Scale this 0.2 times. Now set the shading smooth and rotate this to match the hat. After setting this, let us now set the wool part for the down corner of the hat. For this part, we use a curve path to create the ring-shaped mesh. So, add a circle curve here and scale it so that it is set to the border of the hat. Now open the geometry data drop-down of the curve and adjust the extrude and depth values here. So, enter 0.155 for extrude and 0.046 for depth values of this. After that, adjust the scaling to fit the hat mesh exactly. Use wireframe view for the scaling here, it helps to see the scaling better. Now switch to edit mode and select all the verts here and subdivide it. Now let's adjust the verts of this mesh ring and get this mesh out of the symmetrical look here. The realism of a hat usually comes from its asymmetrical little details. So, without making a big loss to the symmetry here, set the small changes as shown here. Now we have done the modeling part of the Santa's hat. So, now let us set the wool hairs for these meshes using the Blender particles. Let's start with the sphere mesh first. So, select the sphere and set the particle settings. But before that, let's apply the scale of this object. This is a very important step to do when we create a particle system for an object. So, before you set the particle settings here, apply the scale to the object. After applying the scale here, now add particle settings for this and change the emitter to hair. Now give a value of 0.5 for hair length and 5000 for the number of hairs. After setting these values, select Simple for Children particles here and give a value of 10 for the render and display values. Here, we can later change this display value to optimize the viewport render preview. Since display preview is important for us to set particle settings, keep these values for now. Okay, now give the radius value 0.012 here. This radius value controls how far the child hair particles should be from the main hair particle. The particles formed by the number value we have given above are called main hair particles. So, that 5000 particles are the main particles of this system. After that, let us now set the clumping values here. This clump value controls the attraction of the child hair particles to the top and bottom edges of the main hair particles. When this value is changed from 0 to 1, these hair particles change like this. And when this value is changed from 0 to -1, these hair particles change like this. So, plus values control the attraction between top edges, and the minus values control the bottom as well. Okay, now give a value of 0.49 for this. Similarly, the twist value here controls whether the child hair particles should twist with the main hair particle. For this value, enter 0.29. Okay, then let's set the roughness value here. Here the uniform value controls how much roughness is to be applied to these particles. And this size value controls the noise rate of this roughness. Now, give these values as 0.021 and 0.046 respectively. After applying the values, if the hair particles you set do not appear like this, the scale may not be applied to this object. So, try applying it again. Let us now set the particle settings for this mesh part. But you can see that the properties panel does not show particle properties for this mesh. This is because it is a mesh created using a path curve. So, we have to convert this to a mesh first. Then let us set the particle settings for this now. Here also select the hair for the particle type. For now, I give a value for the hair length here, and then I increase the number of particles to see how it works. When I increase the value here, you can see that these particles are not evenly distributed through this mesh. This is because not all the faces in this mesh are the same. By default, the particles are emitted according to the faces of the mesh. So, let's fix this mesh faces of this object. To do this, first, disable the particles preview here. And select the mesh and switch to edit mode. You can now see that all the faces are here not evenly subdivided. So, cut these faces horizontally. Use 15 cuts for this. You can scroll and set the number of cuts for the mesh. After that, now enable particles preview. Now you can see that the particles are properly divided into these faces here. We can now set the values here. Before that, apply scale for this mesh. Now here give 40,000 for number and 0.03 for hair length. After giving that, select simple for the children here and set 10 for the display and sample amounts. For here, set 0.009 meters for radius value. And for the roughness values, set 0.02 for uniform and 0.1 for size. After all, now let's set the render settings for these particles. Here, open the two drop-downs called Render and Viewport Display. There is a value called Steps under Render and a value called Strand Steps under Viewport Display here. These two values give the resolution of these hair particles for the rendering and viewport preview. Now I will copy the render steps value for the steps value in the viewport. You can see the viewport preview change here. The resolution we need for this is in 2 steps. So, if the two values were different, the result of the rendering would also be different. Therefore, give this value and the render steps value as 2. And then set the render steps value for our haired sphere as well. After setting these, we have to create materials for this hat. Before the material creating, change the value of the children display amount of our both particles to 5. This will make it easier for us to preview the viewport when making the materials. Now add a mesh to the ground and scale it to 8 to finish the modeling work here. Now let's place this hat on the ground so that it does not overlap the added mesh. After that, turn the viewport to the front view, add a camera, and set it to the front view. Now adjust the camera view to cover the hat. Okay, now we can start creating materials for this. First, change the engine here to Cycles engine. And we use Blender Sky Textures for lighting here. So, turn the viewport to the rendering. And select Sky Texture for surface color in World Properties here. And enter 0.5 for sun intensity and strength. After setting the world lighting, now let's split the viewport and use one side for the shader editor and the other for the viewport preview. I will use the GPU for the cycles render device here. This allows me to use the GPU for render preview. Now select the fabric mesh part of this hat and create new material for it. Set the HSV values shown here for the base color of the principled shader. And give a value of 0.8 for roughness here. Now, let's give a look of the fabric for this material. For this, we will create a procedural bump map of fabric and use this to get a fabric look here. So, first, add a magic texture and set the node preview for it. To set the node preview in this way, you have to enable the node wrangler add-in in the Blender preference. After enabling that, you can set the node preview on the relevant node using the hotkeys shown here. So, set the node preview to the factor value of the magic texture. And enter 0 for depth and distortion values here. Then, give a value of 200 for the scale here. After these settings, now add a texture coordinator and connect the object vector of this coordinator to this magic texture. And then add a color ramp to the out connection here. Change this to B-spline first. And set the last color stop to black color. Then change the V value of the first color stop to 0.034. After all, let us set this to a bump node and connect it to the principled shader. So, add a bump node to this and make sure the connection is set to the height value here. And now give the strength and distance values of the bump node as 0.5. Now you can connect this to the principled shader and see the final preview of this material. As you can see here, the mesh shape at this corner of the hat is visible through the material. Let's see how to avoid it. Before that, arrange these materials nodes and rename the material. This mesh needs to be further subdivided to avoid these sharp mesh details. You can do this using Ctrl and the number 1 hotkeys, or manually by the modifier properties. Now we completed the red fabric material of the Santa's hat. Now let's make materials for hair particles and their meshes. So, first, create the material for the mesh of this haired sphere. To do this, disable the particle preview here and go to the material properties of the object. Here, create new material for this and change its base color to a pure white color. After that, rename this as a white surface. This material renaming will help in the next section. So, name the materials correctly. After that, add a new material slot to create material for hair particles and set a new material to it. Then rename it as hair. Then change the shader here to principled hair shader. Now we want to see how this creating material applies to hair particles, so, enable the particles preview. Here, the hair particles are still using the white surface material that we created first. So, change the material of the render drop-down of the particles settings to hair. After changing this, let us go to the material properties and change the values. Here, give pure white color for the color value of this shader. Then give a value of 1 for the roughness and 0.5 for the radial roughness value here. Okay, Now select our other particle mesh and first select the white surface material for it. And then add a new slot and select the hair material. After adding these materials, now select this hair material for the particle render material. Okay, now let's create the material for the ground mesh. So, first, hide this hat from the viewport and select ground mesh and switch to render view. Here we have to arrange some nodes to create the material for this ground. So, split the viewport and open the shader editor on one side. Now let's create the materials for this. Here, we want to render this ground as a glacier land. For this, we will use a displacement map to get the depth details of the land. So, now add a noise texture and set the node preview to it. Now add a color ramp to this connection. And then add a vector displacement node to the final out connection of this node flow. After adding these, connect this connection to the displacement value of the material output and the principled shader to the surface value here. Now you can see how this displacement map is rendered through this material. Okay, now let's adjust the values here, get the land details as we want. Enter 3 for the scale value of the noise texture and 5 for the details value here. And give a value of 0.417 for the roughness value here. After that, change the position of the first color stop to 0.377 in the color ramp. Now finally give a value of 6 for the displacement scale here. And now arrange all the nodes here and rename this material. After all, now you can unhide the created Santa's cap and see how it's preview with this glacier land. Now let us set the render settings for this and render. Usually, when rendering hair particles we have to get a large number of samples to get all hair details. And if you use an open denoiser for this, you will lose a lot of the sharpest details here. But we can do a short fix for this and get the render result as we want. Most of the details in the open image denoiser depend on the render resolution. So, the details can be captured by doubling the render resolution and rendering and denoising using a smaller number of samples. Right now, set the sample size here to 32. And then, give a value of 200 for the resolution percentage here. Now enable denoising data passes here, so we can set the noiser through the compositor. And then set the render tile size here. The tile size here should be in line with the rendering device we are using. I will use both GPU and CPU devices to render, so I have to give the tile size that fits the CPU rendering. If you are only using a GPU for rendering, your GPU tile size should be 128, 256, or 512. You can enable the GPU setting for the cycles rendering through Blender preference. If both your GPU and CPU support cycles rendering, CUDA device selection will show both your device as options. By enabling those two options, you can render using both GPU and CPU devices. After setting that, now you can select GPU compute for render device here and get start rendering. After setting all these, now let us set the denoiser through the compositor. Now add the denoise node to this and connect normal and albedo outs. Now, we can render this. Right now, we've finished designing Santa's hat. Create lots of designs and modeling like this for the upcoming Christmas season and try more with Blender. You can also post any creation you make using our tutorials on this channel to our new IBN Blender community group. Through this group, you can find solutions to any problems that may arise in our videos or any other Blender problems. So, use these tutorials to make your Blender works easier and try more and upload the render results of yours to our IBN Blender community. I hope you have learned something new from this video. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you want to watch more videos like this, subscribe to our channel, click on the bell icon on the side, and select all. This will allow you to receive notifications for future uploads. If this video helps your Blender work in any way, don't forget to comment on how. If you have any other issues with this video, please comment as well. And if you would like to support us, please share this video with the Blender users you know. Learn with IBN.